Most of us begin to negotiate by suggesting an option or making a demand or request, and most often, the person with whom we're negotiating doesn't accept our option, agree to our request or demand. This back and forth can continue for some time, and negotiations often fall apart because the parties can't reach an agreement. Consequently, it makes a lot of sense to start by discussing the what. What is it that you're negotiating? In other words, what problem are you trying to resolve? What opportunity presents itself for clarification and agreement? Try to first agree on this aspect before moving to the how. Let's think about an example to clarify what I mean. The parents of an 18-year-old high school senior are discussing the young man's future. Naturally, the young man throws out the school of his choice. If either or both of the parents don't agree with their son's plans or chosen university, they may ignore it or offer their own ideas. This is when it gets tricky. What happens if they collectively toss out ideas for 30 minutes, get nowhere, and actually end up in a heated discussion about how the young man didn't excel in high school and has limited options? You get the picture. Rather than starting with options that are likely to be shot down, the parents and their son should first discuss and agree to the problem or opportunity on which they'll focus. Using the example above, the family could agree to discuss the young man's future in the short and long term, and that could include a wide variety of options they haven't even considered yet. Once it's fairly clear what we're negotiating, it's important to identify the issues that require our attention. These are topics or issues. In the example above, some of the issues that need the family's attention include the son's goals, means of support, interests, and aptitude, and so on. It's also important to think about whether any of the issues naturally go together and should be linked together when they are under discussion. It can also be helpful to prioritize the issues so the most important ones are fully addressed. Since we've already defined interests, let's focus more closely on their value and what to do with them when we're collaborating. Let's be clear, when we collaborate, interests are the primary focus. This is what distinguishes collaborating from bargaining. Interests are those needs, wants, fears, concerns, aspirations, etc., that are often unspoken but compel us to set certain goals. In the example I've used, the parents and their son may each have different interests. If they're different, they are likely to suggest different options. These differences can cause conflict, and when managed poorly, conflict can escalate. So, how do we effectively use information about our own and others' interests? First, we must identify our own interests. Second, we should try to identify and understand another's interest so we can craft options that are more likely to satisfy that person's interest. By speaking to the other's interests, we tend to reach agreements that are more easily acceptable and lasting. When we don't listen for or place value on another's interests, and we suggest options that satisfy only our interests, we often don't reach agreement. Again, using the example of the family, each of them may have shared interests of success, gratification, financial security, and so on, but they may see different ways of satisfying these interests. Perhaps the son perceives that going to an expensive, highly rated university is the key to his success and financial security. Naturally, though, his parents, who have gained experience in their lives, may perceive that an expensive university is nice, but that it has to be affordable for it to be a realistic option. They may also perceive that their son's success will be determined by his chosen profession, the extent to which he is gratified in that role, whether he leaves school with substantial debt, and so on. Now we're back to options. There are different ways to develop options, most notably brainstorming. Negotiators typically suggest options that they prefer. If you hadn't guessed yet, they prefer certain ones because they satisfy their interests. Once negotiators have several or more options to consider, it's time to evaluate them. When the negotiators can't identify options at all, or at least any that are considered acceptable, the parties should develop and agree to criteria that the parties can use to identify options. If we consider our earlier example, the son may suggest Stanford University. His parents may respond with a resounding no because it's very expensive, far away, and the less than excellent student hasn't demonstrated that he's interested in focusing on academics. The parents suggest staying closer to home and starting with a community college before transferring to a 4-year university. The son, naturally, rejects this plan outright. If the parties continue for some time and can't reach agreement, they may find movement if they define what his plan must include. These are criteria and help the family set guidelines that they use to identify options that are more likely to be acceptable. So, how and what do negotiators evaluate? Stated simply, they evaluate each option against their respective interests to determine whether each or a combination of them 1. Satisfies enough of her interest to be acceptable, and 2. Is a better option than her individual BATNA, otherwise known as best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If a negotiator individually answers these questions with a yes, he's likely to agree to the option or a combination of them. If the answer is no, then he may walk away from the negotiation and pursue his BATNA or suggest one or more new options that is likely to be acceptable. If, in the example, the son determines that his parents' preferred option is totally unacceptable because he doesn't believe it sets him up for success, and his grandparents have told him that they'll pay for college if necessary, then he's likely to pursue his BATNA, the grandparents' offer. It's critical that he evaluate each option against his interest, what he knows to be his parents' interest, any shared interest, and the strength of his BATNA when compared to the best option his parents are offering. Experienced collaborative negotiators start by identifying the problem or opportunity. Negotiators who are new to collaboration often start with options, work their way back to the problem, and then forward through the process. That said, collaborative negotiators work back and forth through the process as necessary to come to a conclusion, if there is agreement.